Welcome back to another episode of the Boxscore Geeks Show. I'm your host, Ray Alvarez, and we're going to be talking lots of stuff, integrity fees, big men, things around the NBA. So that's what we got going. With me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. Give a shout out, Brian.
Oh yeah, it's great to be back doing another show, Dre, especially with someone as so much integrity as you.
Fair enough. And actually, Brian, we had a funny thing going on where we both made a script for this week's show, and I just got confused on myself because I opened the wrong one. But anyway, let's get going. A reminder of how things kind of go. We usually do Last Week on Lost, as in if you leave a comment on any of the articles or tweet at us, we'll respond to those. In the first segment, we got two from last week. We go around the NBA with some various topics Brian and I have cooked up, and then we have our big topics that we might talk more long form. This week, we've got Bigs in the NBA Are Weak, according to Wilt Chamberlain in 1987. Very topical, I know, Brian. And in the courts, the state of NBA betting, 2 weeks in a row, Brian, where we're going to give a Tom Haberstroh article. I hope I'm getting his name right. A talk because we're going to talk sports gambling and integrity fees, and that's been related to a lot of the topics we've been discussing recently. All right, so we had two topics or two questions on the show last week. And let's talk both. So one is Dimitri asked, hey, the team rankings seem to be broken. What's up? Oh, yeah. At Boxscore Geeks, we have the team's wins produced. And if you scroll to the bottom, it's supposed to have the sum of the total wins produced compared to their record. That is currently not working. There are a variety of just housekeeping things we need to do around the site, as I've mentioned. So tack that on the list, but I figured we'd let you know we heard. You asked, Dimitri, and yes, yes, those aren't working. I'll forward that along to Patrick. Benji Bopper made a note where last week we were kind of complaining. I don't know. Is that a thing, like complimenting and complaining at the same time?
He's probably talking to me, Dre, because I was going ham on John Henson.
Well, you're right. I cut you off to agree with you, Brian. That's my.
Oh, no, I was done.
Okay. But as a reminder, last week we were talking about this kind of no trade that the Bucks did where they essentially shed Matthew Dellavedova's contract in exchange for George Hill. It cost them a first and second round pick, but they're future picks, and who gives a damn for a playoff team? And additionally, they gave up the rights to John Henson, but John Henson has been injured and hasn't been playing. And our kind of note was, on the one hand, this trade did nothing to improve the Bucks this season. None of the players that were traded really did a lot. And George Hill is kind of superfluous when you look at the fact that the Bucks already really have Giannis, Chris Middleton, Eric Bledsoe. But there's some upside if George Hill comes back healthy. And then additionally, the Bucks now no longer have any bad contracts. But what you and I kind of both agreed on, Brian, is the Bucks really should be focusing on more of a traditional big, because what they have right now is they have Brook Lopez, who is a 7-footer, but he shoots the most threes of any 7-footer ever. And while he's decent at it, or was for a period of time, he doesn't do anything else that bigs do. And like, even as an example, the best comparable I could give you is Dirk Nowitzki back in his prime. And Dirk was very good at shooting from three, but Dirk also like got rebounds and did other things, whereas Brook is really only a shooter. And so the Bucks, we thought, really needed to improve their front court. And what Benji Bopper noted is, well, the Bucks are pretty good at rebounding, and that is true. But here is where it comes down to me, Brian. I love that you can use Dean Oliver's 4 factors to break this down. If you go look at the Bucks and look at the offensive 4 factors, they are 18th in the NBA in offensive rebound percentage, and 6th and 20th in the NBA in free throw to field goal percentage. Whereas on defense, they are first in defensive rebound and first at fouling. So essentially, on defense, they're really, really good at grabbing the board, and I can really attribute that to players like Chris Middleton and Giannis, who are fantastic. Whereas on offense, they're pretty weak. So our point still stands where they really, really don't need Brook Lopez to be shooting all of those threes. And in fact, while Brook Lopez does take the second most threes on the team and is shooting pretty good, 36.7, Chris Middleton's a very competent three-point shooter. Eric Bledsoe's very competent. Malcolm Brogdon's very competent. Tony Snell's actually quite decent. Ersan Ilyasov as well. So I would argue on offense, you could probably spread around those threes, even though Brook Lopez is good at it. And you could, now while you might take a hit on your three-point rate, because they are shooting pretty well from three as a team. You can make up for it in things like drawn fouls. Usually that's one place, if you take shots close to the hoop, that's one of the easiest places to draw fouls. And then also offensive rebound opportunities. So I think that's an interesting point where we said, hey, they really need a more traditional big man that, plays in the paint and gets boards. And yes, on defense, that's not really needed, but on offense, that's where they're hurting right now.
I'll give him a little bit of love here because, so here's the thing. I agree with everything you just said. And yeah, I'd love to have, I love traditional big men. But even the problem is the two big men they have now are just not good players. Like if they were smaller, stretch fours or whatever, but they were good, if they had, let's say the Bucks were starting Draymond Green in center.
Say Draymond Green's the perfect name. But that's always your point, which is to say, if you make the small ball trade-off, and as a weird example, the minute the Warriors picked up, oh, my watch is telling me to breathe. Thanks, watch. The minute the Warriors picked up Kevin Durant, they stopped being a small ball team. Kevin Durant's a center that you can just play from the 3 up to the 5, and so is Draymond Green. But Draymond Green has always been our classic example of this. If you have a stretch 4, they have to be an amazing stretch 4 that can kind of do everything. And that's the problem, is that a lot of teams do kind of the weird Ryan Anderson stretch 4 strategy of this player's not really good at anything except like 3-point shooting. And you can replace that elsewhere and they don't do everything else. So you're leaving wins on the table by leaving important things like rebounding, shot blocking, getting to the line by banging close to the hoop. So I think we basically agree here where it's, one, they don't have any good players at that position. And 2, it is a place that they are a little weak at, where we think just a slight upgrade to Brook Lopez, and you can even look for another big that can shoot threes, but it just shouldn't be Brook Lopez.
Yeah, that's right. And a good traditional big would be ideal, but a good non-traditional big would be better than bad bigs like they have now. That's my final comment.
All right. So, Brian, a subject that has come up, let's get into around the NBA. So just these are kind of random throwaway topics that in theory we shouldn't spend too much time on. I wanted to talk about player names because this is certainly a Boxscore Geeks drinking game. Whenever one of the hosts screws up names, some classics include Patrick Minton's pronunciation of Steph Curry, myself and Arturo's pronunciation of Kawhi Leonard or whatever we say. All sorts of names. I've been saying Dirk Nowitzki wrong for years. But one thing that made me laugh this week is in a game between the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Denver Nuggets, the Nuggets won. Before the game, they were asking Steven Adams about Nikola Jokic. And Steven Adams didn't know who they were talking about because they kept saying Nikola. And he was like, who? And then he said, oh, Jokic. And I was like, yes, vindication. So, and then I looked this up too. Steven Adams has played 11 games at that point, now 12 games against him. So I was like, see, even if you're a professional that does this for a living and in theory studies game film, you can mess up the name. And then the more funny one, the more classic, and I think he messed up like 3 or 4 names, is Stephen A. Smith was doing, kind of what we do, Brian, but, he gets lots and lots of money to do it. So job. He was discussing football, and he thought that Hunter Henry was going to make a difference, and people were like, he's not in. And then I think he listed like 3 or 4 players that were out. I can't recall the full thing.
Yeah, and Antonio Gates, maybe the best tight end of all time. That's arguable with some others. Unretired because Hunter Henry was out for the year, and it was a big news story.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the most cowardly things to do, Brian, where you're like, we're bad at this, but others are worse. But yeah, they're professional people that are paid millions of dollars a year that muck up names too, and I got a kick out of that.
Anytime you get mentioned with Stephen A. Smith, I take that as a win.
All right. I don't know if you put it on the script, Brian, so I'll let you discuss anything on the box scores of the week, my weekly post where I discuss the 5 best box scores and the 3 worst box scores according to my, just kind of personal judgment, but also like production. I will say Giannis, man, is now tied with Steph Curry. He's just amazing. And in another weird twist, this happened last week as well. LeBron James put up the worst game of the week, tied basically with rounding. Put up the worst game of the week, and last week Kevin Durant did. So this is actually making my life a little harder because I have a very nice leaderboard. I'm doing MVP voting scheme: 5 for first, 4 for second, 3 for third. on top 5 box scores of the week, and then -3 for first on my. I also do the 3 worst box scores. I have a very nice leaderboard. I'll run it down for you really quick. Steph Curry, 10 points with 3 appearances, is first, tied with Giannis, but I give the tiebreaker to Steph Curry because he's been on the list more. Second place, LeBron James and Jokic.
Wait, who, Dre? Who was that? No, just
Jokic.
kidding. Keep going.
Yeah. And I
never heard of that guy.
Darren Fox, Anthony Davis, Boban. I'm just going to say Boban. James Harden, Andre Drummond, and Enes Kanter. Got a very nice top box scores of the week. My bad box scores at this point is just pretty much restricted to Donovan Mitchell and Carmelo Anthony, but it's getting hard because players like Kevin Durant and LeBron James are making the list. Now Donovan Mitchell is off to a hot start tonight. He's 2 for 8 with 3 turnovers in personal.
Wow.
So I hope he keeps it up. Although he's done this a few times, Brian. He's had a horrible game, and he has managed to put on a blazing fourth quarter to just make the game bad. Not terrible enough to merit the worst list. But do you have any comments on the box scores of the week? If not, we can get to our next topic.
Yeah, well, we didn't get the Jazz onto the script at all, so I'll just use this opportunity to say it's very troubling that I was seeing rumors about Jabari Parker going to the Jazz, where there's other articles saying he may be out of the league by next year. So Jazz, do not go there.
I apologize. This is actually a mistake on my part, unless you added it, Brian. We have to briefly discuss that. Jabari Parker is just baffling. So as a reminder, what happened, I'm going to try and get Spotrac to get the exact specifics. So those who don't know, Spotrac.com is one of the best sites for NBA salaries. I would rank it up there. Other few good ones are Real GM. Real GM is great because it has like all transactional history, and Basketball Insiders is pretty good because it shows by. So anyway, Jabari Parker signed a 1-year, $20 million deal with the. I guess it's a 1-and-1, but I think it's a club. So it's a 2-year deal, but only 1 year is guaranteed for $20 million, which was a ludicrous amount. I mean, the one benefit they have is they only offered him 1 year, and I have a theory as to why, and we'll get to that later when we discuss the Trevor Ariza trade. But they basically offered him $20 million, which no one else would, and it only took till like December for him to end up on the bench. Now, the theory I might give, actually, I'll say it now, is the same was true with Trevor Ariza's. They might have been picking up him up as an asset they thought they could trade to a team that wanted him, but nobody should want Jabari Parker, even as a 1-year rental for that amount. He is just not good, but it isn't amusing if you're saying that he might be on Utah's radar, because this is essentially the Jay Crowder problem. We've noted that Jay Crowder and Joe Ingles traditionally are 2 players we have thought are very good small forwards. And this season, both of them look a little off. Jay Crowder is just horrible. Joe Ingles is a little below what we'd expect, but
he's still solid, though.
Joe Ingles is still good. Our belief is Jay Crowder, we think, is injured. I mean, he's looked injured for the last 2 seasons. That's a hard thing to gauge, and like I said, we'll discuss that more when we get to sports fees and integrity betting. But Jay Crowder's looked a little injured, and Joe Ingles, we think, is probably just getting played out of position, because when we look over the lineup data, it basically kind of says that they're kind of trying to do the stretch 4 thing we just said is really stupid. They're not playing Favors enough minutes, and they don't, same position actually as Milwaukee, they don't have another 4.
Favors is starting to get some more run, right now. I'll give them credit for that.
It's like a C- bit of credit for, like, I don't know, that's kind of like, it's funny. Back in the day, the fact that I got any credit for this article, I kind of feel annoyed that basically despite having a bit of a chip on my shoulder about the Bucks, which I've mentioned before, I've agreed with all of their moves. Like, I've pretty much given them an A on, signing Giannis. I think a couple, their trade for Monroe and to Eric Bledsoe, their recent trade, I basically said these are all solid, good moves that I can't say it's bad. So good on their analytics squad if they're the reason they made those moves. But, them not having another big, and the same exact problem is happening with Utah, where they just need to get one more. But anyway, just saying, like, not sure if I'd give them credit for giving Derek Favors a few more minutes. When they signed Giannis to like his 4-year deal or whatever, I just kind of went, yeah, he's really good on the age. He's already worth that money. The age curve says he's going to get better, which he did. Just get this move out of the way. It's a funny behavioral psychology bit of logic. I know this is a popular anecdote about Obama, was that Obama had the same outfit just always picked out. And his logic was he didn't want to think about the outfit he was going to pick for the day. So it's just always the same. That way you didn't have to worry about it. It's the same thing I've noticed in front offices. You don't want decisions hanging over your head because then they basically interfere with you making decisions that matter. And as soon as you get to a star player, you're just like, oh, just give the star player the money. Don't haggle over a couple million. That's not worth it. Not even from a money saving standpoint, but it's also not worth it from basically gumming up the rest of your operations because while you're worried about that, you're not focusing on other things you need to, like the draft and trades and whatever. So playing Derek Favors more minutes when he's your only real competent big and he's a good big, I'm like, that's not. I give you 0 points for that. But yeah, Jabari Parker is who they're looking at. That's just a recipe for disaster because that's the exact same position they're already in. They're playing a stretch four at the four that's also not very good, and they really don't need that.
I hope that rumor is not true for Utah's sake. That's all I can say.
Me too. Although that seems to be like the MO this year is, hearing Melo is going here, and you're like, oh God, no, oh God, no, oh God, no, and then it happens. All right, so relating the Jabari Parker benching / rumor exactly to something that happened. This was odd in that I'd almost give Phoenix credit, except then Phoenixed it up. So as a reminder, Trevor Ariza, let's get him up. Let's give him some love for last year because the Houston Rockets, who we keep not talking about but talking about, are struggling this season. And a very obvious reason is that Trevor Ariza played a small forward from last season. He was very, very good. He put up 7.3 wins, according to us, and was worth a margin of 1.7 points over par for 48. Reminder, if you play the full 48 minutes on an average squad against an average squad in a neutral court, you would expect them to win by 1.7 points, which is pretty good. Not star, but really good, especially for, a mid-tier player. Phoenix swooped in the offseason, very similar to Jabari Parker, offered him $15 million a year, and Houston didn't match. And so he went to Phoenix. Now, on the one hand, that's a lot of money, and I know Houston went kind of cheap. But on the other hand, it did matter, and he's still playing, almost the exact same production for Phoenix. I would argue he'd probably be playing better in Houston, actually, next to, well, maybe, I don't know. Houston's a weird position this year, Brian. But so they basically traded for or signed Trevor Ariza as an asset that they knew they would be able to trade in December because they're in rebuild mode. But they're like, this is an asset we'll be able to trade to help our squad out. But Brian, let me get the details up, and I think you already have them. What did they turn Trevor Ariza into? Yeah,
we've got a write-up here on NBA.com. So originally Memphis was involved with this trade, and that did not happen. We'll get to that later.
God,
Memphis got kicked out of this trade or withdrew, and it ended up being Kelly Oubre Jr. and Austin Rivers went from the Wizards to the Suns. So I guess I'll give you my opinion on this trade because it's pretty short before you go into yours. But Ariza is the only good player involved here at all. So that's the only thing that really matters. So that's kind of good for the Rockets, right? Or sorry, the Wizards.
Yeah.
They picked up.
Very good for the Wizards.
Yeah.
It's the funny same thing happened actually with Minnesota when they traded Jimmy Butler. Actually, it's like they're doing some like addition by subtraction. So actually, it didn't happen at all with Minnesota. That doesn't relate at all. But they're getting rid of two bad players and getting back one good player. So they're getting addition by
so it's good for Washington, right? And as far as the Suns are concerned, yeah, it's kind of bad for them. They gave away a good player. Like you said, they signed just to trade and got back two bad players. But that doesn't really matter because they're tanking and these guys aren't signed long-term anyway. So for the Suns, it's just kind of like they help Washington for no reason. So it's just like, eh. So, yeah, I mean, that's what I think about this trade.
Yeah, I mean, that's what is really funny is they did really just screw over Houston and help out Washington. And I don't think Washington's doing that good, although they did just have that really awesome win against the Los Angeles Lakers. But yeah, Washington's kind of in the playoff hunt, but I think Dwight Howard's out for a while and they still have Jeff Green. So this is kind of just a weird maneuver where this falls under a category of a topic we've discussed, I think, like last week, where we kind of say this move looks smart, right? If you're picking up Ariza as an asset to trade at the trade deadline or I don't know what the deadline in December is because when you sign a player, you have to wait. And so mid-December was when they were allowed to trade him. So they traded him as early as they could. That's a pretty savvy move, but then you watch what they do. And we were kind of saying the same thing about the Bucks last week. We were saying they made a really good trade and that it got their books in order. It wasn't an immediately good move, but it was like a good, we like chess a lot on the show, Brian. It was like a good chess positional move. But then essentially what the Phoenix Suns did here was the equivalent of Fabiana Caruana. I always mess up that name. Fabiana Caruana's H3 move. They set up a great position that we applauded, and then we're like, what the hell are you doing? So that's what happened here. But I think to your point, this is what we always say about players that aren't stars in the NBA. It doesn't really matter that much, especially if they're not on long-term deals. So really, they just screwed over Houston. And that's the last point we've had, which is with Houston, letting Ariza go was just a mistake in that if you've only got a couple years of a star core together, Chris Paul, James Harden, Clint Capella, you can't waste it by saying we don't have the money to sign Trevor Ariza. Trevor Ariza can help your team over the hump and make you a contender. Swapping out Trevor Ariza for Carmelo Anthony and Michael Carter-Williams is just saying, you know what, screw this possibility of a title. We've said we hate the boomer bust nature in the NBA of saying if you're not contending, it's not worth it, right? I hated for years that the Denver Nuggets had a streak of 10 years in a row of making the playoffs, and people were calling them failures because they were never a contender. And my thought is just make the damn playoffs and you're a winner. That's so much better than not. But we are actually in the agreement of if you're in a position, which means you have two stars, which is really rare because our star definition basically means a top 15 player in the NBA, which for realistic purposes means top 10% of NBA starters. If you have two players in the top 10% of NBA starters, you are a contender. Just that's it. If you are given that, if any GM worth their salt is given two stars, if they are not able to put together a contender-worthy team, they have no business being a GM. I'm saying that seriously. So if you're in that position and you do stupid stuff, that's where you get hurt. And like that's the funny part about the Houston Rockets, where, you know, letting good players like Trevor Ariza walk, signing mediocre players like Carmelo, signing bad contracts like Eric Bledsoe and Ryan Anderson. It's like that's how you waste a core. And
you mean Eric Gordon, right? Not Eric Bledsoe.
Eric Bledsoe. Eric Bledsoe. He's an interest, but again,
he's actually good.
I was going to say we've noticed this. Basically, Phoenix's MO is to get good guards and then give them away to other teams. So.
I'll say one more thing on this, and that's that even if it doesn't matter that much for wins and losses in the NBA this season, like neither of these teams are going to threaten a playoff run, I think if you're a Wizards fan, it's a very good sign for the decision-making of your front office, right? Because what they're saying here is instead of, try to fall down into the lottery when we're having a mediocre season, they're 12-18 right now, I think. Maybe they have one more win than that. But what it's saying is we want to try to contend for the last few playoff seeds. And that's good, right? Like you said, it was addition by subtraction. They got rid of two bad players and added one good one. This is a trade that could push them into the playoffs. And if you're a Wizards fan, that's what you should want instead of trying to tank.
True, but I mean, what we kind of noticed this offseason with the Wizards too, and I was mentioning this, is like a lot of who knows moves, right? We thought picking up Dwight Howard was a good move, but then they picked Jeff Green and Austin Rivers, and we're like, who knows? So
they fixed that though.
But they could just be on a seesaw here, right? Where it's like pick up Trevor Ariza, and we're like, fantastic move, and then tomorrow it's like they outbid for Jabari Parker by trading away John Wall, and we're like, what the hell? Or actually more accurately, their one good asset, I think that's a good priced player, is Otto Porter Jr. And I was looking at his numbers, and I actually noticed this. We've really, really liked him, and he's kind of down a little this year, and it falls into the Joe Ingles point. And then I would say like the reverse Joe Ingles with Danilo Gallinari, which is when you have a really good small forward and you think they're really good at playing small forward, let's play him as a power forward. We're always kind of like, you could just play him as a small forward and they beat the crap out of small forwards. And then you just get a normal power forward who's just average at being a normal power forward, but that's fine. And what's more, from like an arbitrage standpoint in the NBA, we do just tend to notice that good power forwards tend to be undervalued. So it's like, it's a weird thing to say, I'm going to take one of my good players, play them out of position to make them worse than they normally would be by playing them against harder competition, is what it is.
And the numbers do back that up. Maybe it's a coincidence and there's other factors involved, but this is what happened. In 2016, 2017, Otto Porter was almost a pure small forward. He was a 3.2 on the position, charts. So that means he was almost, very heavily small forward play. And he had really good numbers. He was a near superstar, right? He played, his position was 3.4 last year in the 17-18 year. A little bit more power forward, and he was a bit worse, right? And then here we are this year. He's all the way to a 3.8 position. So he's closer to a pure power forward, as close as he was a small forward 2 years ago. His numbers are way down. So, yeah, that could be it, Trey. You could be onto something.
Well, and also, I mean, as a funny note, this I got to give kind of a shout out for him noticing this and then me responding. Snotty Drippin on Twitter noticed just how good Paul George is playing, and this was a fun one, Ryan. Paul George's wins per 48 this season is 250. Kevin Durant's 249.
Yep. That's a recent thing, though. Durant was higher earlier in the season.
I would also say, to be fair, Kevin Durant does, and the numbers back this up, play a fair bit of power forward. But Paul George is basically being played exclusively at the 3 this season with the Thunder. And we noticed this back with Paul George with the Indiana Pacers. What happened was, as a young player, Paul George looks amazing. Gets injured in the Olympics and doesn't look as good. That's very common. Injured players don't play as well. And then the Pacers started doing small ball and playing Paul George at the 4. And we were like, he is an average power forward. People were like, he's amazing. He's a star. And we're like, well, with how he's being played, he's just average. Now with OKC, he seems to have gotten healthy and they're playing him at the 3 and he looks amazing. And so this is, to me, just from a strategic standpoint, Devin Dignam used to bring this point up all the time, and I kind of like it, which is you play the tallest player at the smallest position you can. It's why players like Giannis, Magic Johnson, heck, even LeBron, you could even argue this kind of is true of LeBron James and Ben Simmons. You can play this guy who's got the body of a 4 as your point guard, which means you're now like, it's not even from an offensive perspective, it's not even the same, right? Because offense touches, it varies based on who the person on the team is, right? It'd probably be, Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons on like the 76ers. Back in the day, it would be like Kobe Bryant on the Lakers, obviously like Michael Jordan on the Bulls. So that can vary to a degree, but on defense now you basically go, I have a 6'6" guy in Michael Jordan's case, a 6'9" guy in Magic's case, a 6'11" guy in Giannis and I think Ben Simmons' case. You're outmatched, right? You're outmatched on the defensive side. It provided they're somewhat mobile, and these players that I'm talking tend to be. But you play the biggest player at the smallest position you can, and by that I also am including like mobility, which is why there is such a premium on players like Draymond Green. But that's the funny thing. The Warriors have gotten away with playing Draymond Green as a power forward because he is that damned good. But we argue, what if you could find a way to play him at small forward because they had a legit power forward, which arguably they got in like Kevin Durant, but then their center situation is all mucked up. So if DeMarcus Cousins comes back healthy, that's going to be nuts to basically have Durant, Draymond, and Cousin. That I really want to see if that front court can be healthy and what it can do, because that's what the Warriors have needed for years and haven't quite had. Why don't you do that? So the same thing, like Paul George being played purely as a 3 is the right maneuver. And just from a strategic standpoint, we think that's what more teams should do, as opposed to the alternative, which is they say, what if we can play this really good player at the 3 as a 4, and instead of them being really, really good as a 3, they're now just average as a 4.
Yeah, and you've talked about this a lot in the past. These people are really getting fooled by fake small ball, right? They're seeing players that may be a little bit shorter, but are still actually play really big, like Draymond Green. And that's way different from having a Morris brother or someone like that, that you say is a stretch 4, but really doesn't produce any big man stats at all. So, yeah, I mean, the Warriors are an interesting case this year because they have been playing. They don't have McGee anymore or Pachulia. They don't have those 7-footers. They had Damian Jones for a while. He's out for the year now. He's a 7-footer, but he didn't really rebound at all. So they're kind of going with the 3 power forwards approach, which is interesting. They're not playing any small forwards or any centers. They're just playing only power forwards. And it's been effective. Like Looney, Jerebko, Durant, Green, all those guys can rebound and are skilled on offense. So it's been interesting.
Well, there was a funny meme going around today, or just a viral tweet, which was like, getting up at 4 a.m. is like what the successful people do. Now, and a bunch of people were making fun of that, but Dave Barry made the most astute observation. It's based on a sample size of 4. So that doesn't mean a damn thing. When you were saying the fake small ball, that's the problem. These teams are going, the strategy is to play what you're saying, the 3 power forwards approach. And you raise your hand and you go, you can do that if you have Draymond Green and Kevin Durant, who are able to play 3 through the 5 easily, probably 2 through the 5, honestly, and are amazing. But as we just said, we were like saying 2 of the top 15 players in the NBA, and Draymond Green in a good year is a top 15 player, in a bad year is a top 30. That's the thing, is teams get fooled into thinking this team can do it, and you go, the reason they can do it is because they have special players that you don't have. This is not a strategy. The strategy that they are employing that is successful is have the best players in the NBA. And that strategy has always worked for succeed. We've yet to see that not succeed, kind of. I need to take another look at Memphis. Memphis is, I don't understand the Memphis Grizzlies, Brian. They still they still baffle me. I don't know if they have any players that look good yet. I think maybe Kyle Anderson obviously looks pretty good for them. I believe was a mistake for the Spurs to let him go. Yeah, Mike Conley and Kyle Anderson are basically Trevor Ariza level players for the Memphis Grizzlies, and that's it. But we have not really seen a team without star players be a top team in the NBA. That's the strategy. The strategy isn't play 4 power or 3 power forwards. It's get good players, and teams, like you said, I liked what you were noting, get fooled into thinking small ball is the answer as opposed to the real answer, which is get really good players. And yeah, if you've got Kevin Durant, you can do whatever the hell you want. By the way, on the Phoenix-Washington trade, this was just too amusing. There
Brooks, yeah.
2 Brooks. It was Marshawn Brooks and Dylan Brooks. Now, it's interesting where this season I don't believe it really matters. They're both terrible. But I think traditionally, I'm trying to remember which one has been better in the past. I think one of the two has actually looked a little better historically. So I'm just going to try and look that up really quick. Yeah, historically, Marshawn Brooks has looked pretty good. So I can't remember if they were saying they didn't want to trade Marshawn Brooks. They wanted to trade Dylan Brooks. But both players look terrible.
I think the Suns wanted Dylan, but Memphis didn't want to give up Dylan. They only wanted to give up Marshawn. And so that became the deal breaker, Dylan Brooks. And yeah, just to that point, this whole thing is ridiculous, right? Neither of the Brookses should be a deal breaker at all. And we always make fun of like marginal players being reported as deal breakers. To me, that's suspicious, and like there's something else going on. But who knows with NBA owners, right? They're eccentric.
Yeah. And then what I'll also say is important to remember about NBA owners, and we're going to get to one in a second here that definitely falls under this. They're human and can get petty. I think people really do underestimate how non-analytical managers, and I'm not just talking NBA, I'm talking like business-wide, things are. If you look over the history of any business, of any industry, you will find random encounters where just one person pissed off another person randomly. One of my favorites, I'm trying to remember the book specifically, Blake J. Harris wrote it, but it's about the console. I think it's called Console Wars, and it's about Sega versus Nintendo. And there were bizarre things. One of the weird things they brought up is that PlayStation, like the PlayStation was like a German company with Panasonic, and there were just weird arguments between Sony and other companies, which is why various deals didn't get through. There were like cultural differences. And the same thing happened with Sega, where they had like a US side and a Japanese side, and they just feuded. And you go, you had a winning team, right? You had a squad that was poised to win, and petty little differences got in the way that didn't really matter. And the same thing happens all the time with NBA owners, which leads us into, there's this interesting article on the Knicks, and I really want to read, I think it was an interview with James Dolan, where James Dolan said he is considering selling the New York Knicks. He said for a bona fide offer. What I would stress to you is a bona fide offer, in my opinion, for the Knicks would be at least $5 billion, and that's probably undervaluing them.
And yeah, and that's what I wonder is if that includes the MSG network and Madison Square Garden and all that. I'm not sure if it's a package deal or not, but yeah, this story is interesting to me because, well, so first of all, just to state the obvious, he should sell. I think he's proven he's not a good owner, and he's kind of like holding the most valuable franchise hostage, and that's hurting the league. Like, I'm sure if you put a gun to Adam Silver's head, he would say, yeah, James Dolan should sell. But this to me is just, I don't know, maybe it's trolling, or it's just like maybe this reporter kind of pried that out of him, and it's just funny how much Knicks fans want this to happen, and they're right. They should want it to happen.
Should give an important note about owners like James Dolan, like Mark Cuban, like Ted Leonsis, Joe Lacob. What I'll say is, being an NBA owner, unless you are just viewing the team as an asset to sell in the future, which isn't a bad maneuver, right? Owning an NBA team, part of the reason is the cachet of it, is being kind of, it's owning something valuable, right? There are only 30 NBA teams. There are only 140, 100. I'm trying to remember. I think there are 32 NFL teams and 32 NHL teams, I believe. I can't recall. But, there are under 150 main four major league teams in North America. So by owning one, you just immediately get mainstream notoriety that you might not just get for being rich. And there is something about rich people that like being in the spotlight. Even before the fucking presidential debacle, right? Donald Trump did a lot of work in a very bizarre, narcissistic fashion to just be in the spotlight. And if you read things about Donald Trump pre-president, which I wish more people would have done, you would see these weird things where he would just force himself into, spotlight movies, etc., kind of just because he wanted the attention. So when you're saying that this seems trolly on James Dolan's part, you're not wrong. And it's also going, by having an NBA team, people will listen to him. You can get a mainstream media network to listen to him talk. If you take that away, he's a rich person, and not as many people, at least in the mainstream, will want to hear him talk. So I think, to your point, there might be a significant offer. A funny comparison that was actually close in value to my point. I said like $5 billion at minimum, and I think that might be lowballing it. Two-part reason for that, Brian. I believe the Clippers sold for $2 billion, and then Mark Cuban astutely noted, and I agree and disagree with Mark Cuban, kind of hit or miss, but he was saying after gambling looked like it was on the way to becoming legalized in the United States, he said that that was doubling the value of franchises. And I do think if the NBA, and that's our next topic, by the way, I'm going to skip over two of our middle topics, Brian, but if the NBA does address legalized gambling correctly, that is huge for the league. So anyway, James Dolan, like I said, $5 billion, heck, even $10 billion for the Knicks, right? He could sell them for that money. Think of George Lucas. George Lucas had the Star Wars franchise, which he sold, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, for $8 billion, which is a ton of money. It's so much money. And he regretted it instantly, made some really in poor taste comments about what the new, I'm not repeating them. You can maybe you can flash it, but I'm not repeating it out loud.
And how much better are those Star Wars movies now, Dre, that after he's out of the picture? So much better.
That's a subject for another Star Wars. Sorry. All right, you broke Dre.
We'll get Eugene Fisher back here to talk about it.
All right, but anyway, EJ Fisher. But yeah, so
yes.
Eugene is right. But anyway, sorry. Complete tangent. But yeah, he stole
Eugene EJ Fisher.
All right. Good job, Brian. This was very much a icing the kicker moment right there that you did. Okay.
It's time to talk betting then, probably.
We'll get there in just a sec, but we'll finish this. Yeah, he sold Star Wars $8 billion. That's so much money. That's more money than anybody ever needs. And that's kind of the point. That extra money doesn't help. But the minute he sells Star Wars, people are like, we don't give a damn what you say about Star Wars anymore. No one wants to hear what you say, George. And I think he realized that. He's like, I was a big deal that people would listen to. I could get in front of a camera and say, my thoughts on Boba Fett are, and people perk up because they go, you own Star Trek. Is a Boba Fett movie in the works? If he gets in front of a camera and says, I wrote a complete history of Boba Fett, the Mandalorians, da-da-da-da, people are like, okay, big deal. Who cares? Thank you very much. Heck, damn it, Brian, this does actually relate to another thing. So I'm going to tie it into a topic I thought I was going to drop, and then we'll get to it. But that's the point. I think James Dolan might be toying with that comment, but it might be very Trump-like, right? Where he's saying this out loud to get the attention, and that attention that he gets from being an NBA owner is probably more valuable than the money to him, which George Lucas proves. And then kind of as a last point to that, I was just like on YouTube, an interview with Wilt Chamberlain came up in 1987. I don't recall what I was watching in order to see that, what the algorithm thought. Must have been only one or two steps because, the third or fourth step on the YouTube algorithm is a Nazi. So this was like step 2. So whatever.
I usually get it on the very first play next is Nazis for me, but yeah.
I like chess. They're like, here, this Nazi, talk about why white chess proves that the white race is superior or whatever. But I was watching this interview with Wilt Chamberlain in 1987, and what was remarkable is he was saying, big men in the league nowadays,
I have it queued up. Do you want me to play the audio for people listening before you talk about it?
I don't want to get dinged. I'll just recap and then we'll.
I forgot about licensing. Okay, keep going.
But basically, Wilt Chamberlain just said, NBA big men in the league nowadays are soft as compared to my era, and I still had to play with good people. He's saying this in 1987, and this is when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Hakeem Olajuwon, I think David Robinson was a year or two out. You had some fantastic
Patrick Ewing was there.
Yeah, I think. Oh yeah, because that was really fast.
Mutombo was about to enter the league as well.
Oh yeah, that was 92, I think, or something. But anyway, 91, 90.
Shaq was 1990 also.
Right. So anyway, it's this bizarre note where he's saying, bigs in the league nowadays aren't as good as my era. And it just reminded me of the same thing going forward. And I was talking with Jeremy Britton about this. And the funny part is when you're part of something like Wilt Chamberlain was of NBA history, like James Dolan is in owning the Knicks, for better or for worse, he's part of the history. When you have that ownership, that feels valuable. And then if you lose the ownership, right, if the next generation comes along, one of the tough things to stomach is that you might not matter as much as you think, that the thing is still able to exist without you. And so that's to tie it all back together. That's why I think James Dolan doesn't want to sell the Knicks, because you view former stars like Wilt Chamberlain, who were the face of the NBA at one point, going, this new crop sucks. And the reason they're saying this new crop sucks isn't because the new crop sucks. They're saying it because they're going, I matter. Please tell me I still matter. And as soon as they're, it's all sports leagues are, what have you done for me lately? You can be the biggest name in the NBA, and as soon as you're out the door, no one gives a damn what you think. See, like Michael Jordan, as soon as he left the Bulls, right? The Wizards, when he quit the Wizards front office to go back to being a player, when he tried to come back, the Wizards were like, who gives a damn? You don't matter anymore. You're not a player. And so he basically had to buy his way into an NBA team. It's, what have you done for me lately? And that's why I think James Dolan will not sell the Knicks. But here's hoping. Here's hoping he makes a stupid decision. He certainly has before.
Yeah, and that feels right to me. When he uses the word, it has to be a bona fide offer. I think what you said is right. That means, no, I'm not planning on selling. So if you guys want to get rid of me, you're going to have to really pay me off. Drive that price up.
I mean, it's worth so much. And I mean, it's the biggest media market in the NBA. It's one of the most storied it is a storied franchise, albeit it hasn't won anything since the 70s, but that would be good for the NBA.
Is that right? They never got one in the 90s, or no, I guess they didn't.
Only number 8 seed to make it to the NBA finals, but didn't win. Was it Starks who choked in game 7?
Yeah. I guess they didn't get there in the 90s. They lost to the Rockets, and yeah.
All right, well, let's talk Tom Haberstraw's. I'm going to look that up to see how to say it, just because he keeps coming up. He's too damn good. And what he brings up, I want to make sure I get the name right, is he's talking about about the prospect of legalized sports gambling coming to the NBA and what it means. And the person he brings up is Vic. I apologize if I get this name wrong. Vic Salnerno.
Yeah, and so this is an article from December 13th he wrote. It's called In the Courts, the State of NBA Betting on NBC.com. I'm
going to say Vic Salnerno, and I'm just going to say Vic for the rest. That's who I'm talking about.
I think it's Salerno.
Salerno, thank you. Well, hopefully you're right. But, okay, he is the president of U.S. Bookmaking and was inducted into the American Gaming Association Hall of Fame in 2016 for his innovation in the regulated sports wagering industry. And I'm reading that direct from Tom's article. So Vic was talking about this is Tom talking about Vic's take on the NBA embracing legalized betting and what that can mean for the future of the sport. And one of the funny co-parts of that is the major leagues, I think, have finally kind of accepted. And by accepted, I mean, like, it's very similar to the NCAA, Brian, where it's the most open secret in the world, and the NCAA has to pretend. They're like, we're amateurs, and you're like, you're a professional league, and they're like, no, we're amateurs. Like, no, everybody knows you're a damn professional league. Just say you're a professional league, pay the players. No one gives a damn. Who cares? The NBA with betting and all sports leagues, people care about betting. Betting is a huge part of the professional sports market, and to say otherwise is lying to yourself. And part of it was recently of this year, the Supreme Court struck down the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, whatever. Just the act. They struck it down, and basically that meant that gambling was legal in New Jersey. And so New Jersey has just been doing gangbusters in the 6 months they've had legalized sports wagering. And obviously the leagues have taken note. And one of the things they wanted was Adam Silver kind of coined this phrase, was like an integrity fee. What they want is basically a quarter.
It's a royalty, right?
Essentially, yeah. So the way most places try and make money. So the most common example would be poker. In poker, if you and I play a hand in a casino, Brian, and I bet $10 and you bet $10 and you match it, right? That's $20 hand. I don't win $20. I win $19. The house keeps one. They're basically charging rent for us to play. The ideal world for a sports book, someone doing gambling, is to place the line that is saying how much they think a team will win or lose by, such that the exact same number of people bet on each side. And if that case occurs, they basically collect a percentage. Now, if they happen to be right, and they say we think that Phoenix is going to lose by 20, and more people bet that Phoenix isn't going to lose by 20, and then Phoenix loses by 25, they make even more money. That gets down to having really savvy people set the lines. But regardless, their ideal world to make money is to collect a percentage of each bet. That's the perfect world if they can get it. And the NBA and other leagues, NFL, MLB, hockey as well, have said, we want 0.25% of all the bets. We want, because we are providing the sport, we think we deserve a part of that. And people like Vic are saying, no, that's ridiculous. If you want to make money off of gambling, you can partner with the leagues or partner with sports books directly. The leagues can partner with sports books or other, things like casinos. You shouldn't just by default in the legislation get a part of that. And one of the things, though, that he's bringing up that I think is key to this point and key to the future of sports gambling, I'm just saying gambling with the NBA, as he brings up the NBA Finals. Because in the NBA Finals, after the first game, after LeBron James puts on one of the most ridiculous NBA Finals performances, only to lose because J.R. Smith grabs a rebound and dribbles it out instead of trying to put it back or call a timeout, LeBron James apparently was so incensed he punched a whiteboard and injured his shooting hand. Now, he did play the rest of the NBA Finals quite good, but that, with how well he played that first game and how much he was invested, there's nothing that says he couldn't have played even better. And what Vic says is after the NBA Finals was over, LeBron James admitted this, and he was like, what the hell is going on? None of the bettors knew about this, and this clearly impacts things. As his point, Cleveland did not cover the spread any of the remaining, 3 games in the NBA Finals. They were just blown out. Oh, sorry.
The article uses the word inexcusable breach of trust.
Inexcusable breach of trust. Exactly. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And so Vic's point is the NBA has 2 things that they have to keep in mind going forward with sports betting. One is this just we by default deserve a cut of the profits is, in his take, and I don't disagree, kind of a ludicrous attempt to make money. And there are other ways for the league to make money, but it does make sense, right? They're saying you owe us part of the money. I really hope that betting fights back huge, because we've noticed other ridiculous parts like, Scott Walker, rest in peace, you Venn diagram idiot, gave $250 million to have a stadium put in for the Bucks, which they had no business doing. I don't think the leagues by default deserve assistance. I think if they've got a business, the exact same point Vic's making, if you want to make money off of gambling, you partner with the casinos, you partner with them that way. You're not just entitled to the money via legislation. But also, if they want to take gambling seriously, they do need to be more upfront with this. And I will say, as someone who's just very interested in daily fantasy sports, the NBA is a horribly, what's the word I'm looking for? Like back in the day, medieval, I guess, compared at least to football and baseball. It is remarkable how bad the NBA is when it comes to news about things like this. Now, the NBA is trying to fight back. We don't have to tell you this about LeBron James because, then if we had to tell you that about every player, it'd get ridiculous. The day we're recording this, I'll give you an example. An hour before the game was scheduled to start, the Minnesota Timberwolves game, Jeff Teague was announced as active. This was, for what it's worth, in daily fantasy sports terms, known as lineup lock, because usually you have to get your lineup set by the time the first game of the slate starts, which is typically 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So around that time, they say Jeff Teague is active. Then 45 minutes before the game starts, they say Jeff Teague is sitting for the night. And that is huge. That has huge implications on people playing daily fantasy sports, which is kind of what led the way to legalized betting. For those of you that don't know, so I see a lot of backstory, Brian. It's a very meaty topic. Daily fantasy sports is just like fantasy sports, except you roster a new roster each day. So for football teams, you have this roster for the whole season. You trade it out. Daily fantasy is you're just given a salary cap. Each day starts anew, which means player news is really important. Knowing that Derrick Rose is starting versus Jeff Teague is starting matters a lot for that. And that is the precursor to betting. And that same news, as we know, matters a lot for betting on the game. If it's 6 p.m. and I'm trying to decide if I want to bet on the Minnesota Timberwolves, if they've told me their starting lineup versus not, that is huge information that really matters. And by not releasing that information, they are basically making an inferior product. And in this same article, Mark Cuban, like I said, we can agree or disagree, but I tend to lean towards agree with him, said that legalized gambling doubled the value of like NBA franchises because the NBA is like the hottest league with some of the biggest place for betting, right? Baseball and hockey are kind of boring. Basketball's got 80, as compared to football. Football betting is huge, but there are only 16 games a season for each team. 82 games a season for the NBA, tons of stuff there. But it is really just mundane of how teams handle injury information and news to fans. And that, in my opinion, really does need to change, especially if they're going to try and even float the idea that they deserve an integrity fee for betting. Whew,
yeah. No, there's a lot here. And there's some other stuff from this article, too, surrounding those Mark Cuban comments. There's some stuff on Adam Silver's op-ed about gambling. That was, I think, from 4 years ago. So
and they were saying that was huge in that, it would very much be like the NCAA president, non-ironically. There have been a few times where if you dissect what the NCAA president has said, they're basically like, yeah, this is an amateur. They're like, if people are coming to these schools to just worry about the sport and not their academics, they really shouldn't come here. And you're like, yes, we agree. Which basically undoes one and done. But it would be like if the NCAA president came out tomorrow and said, all of these players playing for us are professional athletes. And, the future of the NCAA is ensuring that we treat them with the utmost professionalism. That is essentially what Adam Silver did in coming out with his op-ed 4 years ago, as you're saying, and saying gambling is pivotal for the future of the NBA.
Yeah, it's like that first, golden spike they drive for the Transcontinental Railroad. Like that was kind of the beginning of, and so this article is sort of, checking in 4 years later. How are things going so far? So it's pretty interesting. I had one other point, but it's escaped me. So let's keep going.
We're almost done, which is awesome.
Yeah.
But the last comparison I'll give is last week we talked about Greg Popovich coming out and saying he didn't like threes in the modern NBA. And I said, on the one hand, I sympathize with him because I'm a person. Fun thing, Brian, for amusement, I purchased Mike Tyson's Punch-Out for my Nintendo DS.
Great
game.
game.
I spent it because I was basically sick of emulators randomly crashing on me. I said, you know what? I'll actually put up the money to have a legit copy that I know won't crash on me. I am able to get to Mike Tyson with one knockdown. I've never beaten Mike Tyson without using save points, so that's still my goal. I'm still working on that.
I have beaten Mike Tyson, Dre, and I will say it is worth it. Learn that fight and learn how to beat Mike Tyson fair and square. It is a worthwhile task.
I always get jumpy, so in the first minute and a half of the first round, all of Mike Tyson's punches knock you out in one hit. It's actually Mr. Dream because they let the license on Mike Tyson lapse, and obviously the Wii store isn't going to have Mike Tyson. They're going to have Mr. Dream, not Mr. T. Sorry, Mr. Dream.
Who's a white guy, by the way? They whitewash Mike Tyson. Give me a break.
Well, Anyway, there's some.
Yeah.
We're going to stay on this tangent, Brian. Screw it. Originally, that game wasn't supposed to have Mike Tyson as the final boss. It was supposed to be after you beat. How am I dropping his name? Like the Super Macho Man or whatever the last guy is.
Super Macho Man's the second to last guy. Yeah.
He was supposed to be the last. They were going to be done after that, but they got a license with Mike Tyson and added him in. So he wasn't even originally supposed to be there. So yeah, they did actually that is pure white. You're 100% right, Brian. They pure whitewashed him. Funny note, it was Mr. Dream. And it's funny because I know Tommy the Duke Morrison was slated to fight Mike Tyson, and he was Tommy Dreamer in Rocky V. So who knows? They might have been doing something there. And then he had a bunch of off the court issues too that just put Mike Tyson to shame, oddly enough, which is nuts to think that. So regardless,
yeah, I think he died from AIDS.
He died from AIDS and all sorts of other stuff. A subject for another day. I think we've talked to him before though. But I can certainly understand because people are like, oh, the new Spider-Man game is so amazing. I'm like, Mike Tyson's punch out's pretty fun. And Greg Popovich is saying that. There are a lot of old school coaches in the NBA that probably feel, why the hell do I have to tell anybody who I'm planning to play tonight? Why the hell do I have to divulge injury information? I can't remember. I think it was Mason Plumlee, but earlier this season, as I've noted before, Mike Malone of the Denver Nuggets randomly benched a guy. And after the fact, he said, oh, yeah, we decided at shoot around this morning to bench him. And you go, why the hell didn't you tell anybody? And I can see that a lot of old school NBA coaches, as an example, is like the old school mentality. I've heard George Karl, very much like Greg Popovich, hated the three-pointer. It took him a while in the Denver Nuggets to warm up to the idea that threes were good. And for what it's worth, Coach Karl, George Karl, was an amazing offensive coach. The numbers do seem to back this up. He played the wrong players, but he ran really good offensive schemes. But he hated the three-pointer, and you had to coax him and say, you have to do this. So I understand that there are a lot of coaches that have the mentality of, I'm going to be secretive and chess-like, and I don't want to share my plans. But you also go, well, fine. Then you don't get the multi-million-dollar deal. If you want to be a secretive KG coach, go coach high school basketball for fun. If you want to be in the modern NBA that has every franchise is worth over $1 billion, according to Forbes, if you want to be in that era and you want to be in that era going forward, then and the NBA wants to claim that they have integrity, then they damn well better start improving like news feeds and stuff. And that still is a major problem, which that's what I really enjoyed about this article you shared, Brian, is that the sports books people are noticing that. They're going, fuck no, are we giving you just a quarter of a percent of our handle off the bat, NBA? You want money, partner with us. And for what it's worth, by the way, like the NBA owns part of FanDuel. And I believe they partner with both FanDuel and DraftKings, who own, I think, 90% plus of the daily fantasy sports market. They are already invested in these ventures in both sports betting and daily fantasy sports. And they really need to start treating it more seriously.
Yeah, why should we pay an integrity fee when there's no integrity, right? That's kind of the summary of that argument. And as far as Mason Plumlee goes, he had an article coming out, I think today or yesterday, saying he's having a really good year and he knows his role on the Nuggets, and that's why he's so good. And in fact, there's also Sue Bird came out and said her favorite type of player is a player who knows their role. So it sounds like, yeah, Mason Plumlee and the Nuggets are doing really well. And Sue Bird knows what's up.
Can I give a funny postscript? Because last season I was kind of really harsh about Donovan Mitchell. And this season he's having a rough sophomore year. Well, whatever. There's still time. There's plenty of time for him to develop.
He's really young.
But what I'll say is one of the things that was fun for a brief period of time was Trey Lyles looks so much better than Donovan Mitchell. This season, even with Donovan Mitchell struggling, I would rather have Donovan Mitchell than Trey Lyles. So I at least apologize for that. All right. Let's see. I think just as kind of I think we can go to shout-outs unless you have anything else to say.
No, I'm ready.
Fine. All right. A shout-out that does relate to what we were just saying about taking sports betting seriously. Dave Berria was on the Sarah Spain podcast for ESPN. It was fantastic. He talked about the WNBA. If you're interested about the behind the scenes, what happened at Forbes, he talks about that. And in that podcast, he makes a great point about the NBA and the WNBA and the NBA really needing to take the WNBA seriously as like a future endeavor. Like if they want the WNBA to grow, they really need to pay the players what they're worth. They really need to actually advertise it, and instead of what they're doing now, which is kind of like going, we think this is going to fail, which is a very bizarre thing. Even the James Dolan articles where he's talking about selling, it's like James Dolan is not treating his WNBA franchise with respect. If you want that to be a future venture that succeeds, you need to treat it with respect. And we're in the same boat with gambling, saying if the NBA believes in this future with gambling, they really need to treat it with respect if they want to profit from it. Because I think that the key is gambling will succeed with or without the NBA's cooperation now. And the NBA can decide if they're going to profit and help it or if they are just going to hurt themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And, gambling is so funny. It's like, of course, people moralize about it and people get gambling problems, but it's like, this is the same thing with prohibition for everything, right? When there's prohibition, there's a black market and there's problems. So the NBA is bringing it into the light, and that's how they're going to deal with all these issues. So, yeah, of course, this is the right thing for them to do.
One of the, sorry, I have to get another word on that. One of the annoying things about that is when daily fantasy sports was getting really big, the reason was because of that act I talked about, the PASPA Act.
PASPA.
Yeah. And in that act, they basically talked about daily fantasy sports as a game of skill. Now, it was originally designed to protect fantasy sports season long, and they never had daily fantasy sports in mind. But the key word was game of skill. And so daily fantasy sports for years was like, we're not wagering, we're a game of skill. We're not wagering, we're a game of skill. And every goddamn, sorry, cussing again, Brian, but every freaking personality thought they were so clever to say, this is gambling. And my thinking was, it is not the fault of the site that they are avoiding the word gambling like the plague, because the reason they're able to do that is a law outlawing gambling and calling it something else is why they're able to do it. And the irony is the sites like FanDuel and DraftKings did not put the same effort into helping people with gambling problems. Because, like casinos do that, where if someone has a gambling problem, they can put their name on a list or get their name put on a list and they're banned from playing at the casino. And the same type of enforcements could have been placed on daily fantasy sports, but they were working so hard to say, hey, we're not gambling. They weren't helping people. So to your point about the moralization, that's always kind of the take of, if this is something that doesn't harm others, and for the most part, you could make that argument, right? Like gambling probably doesn't harm other people, but that's
just you and your family pretty much, right?
But the point being, then you can try and ensure that you can help the people that might have issues with it, et cetera. But because of kind of weird litigious natures of it, people weren't giving help because they were actively going out of their way to say, if we admit it's the whole stupid prohibition on like sex, the weird abstinence only thing, by saying abstinence only is the only way, you prevent people from actually curbing various issues. So it's very much the same way here. I think to what you're saying, the black market prohibition, et cetera, it is just the case. Gambling is a huge part of sports. It's there. People can do it. People do it legally and illegally. And I much prefer what you're saying. If you bring it into the light, regulate it, whatever, that is a much safer, more sanitized version that's better for everybody, as opposed to this weird, like I was comparing to the NCAA belief of saying, no, sticking your head in the sand and just ignoring something that everybody is already doing.
Yeah, my last thing on that is to the Mark Cuban point of, what do you say, doubling the value of the franchises or whatever. There's another good quote from Vic Salerno in that article saying basically, who's going to want to watch two, below 500 NBA teams play each other late in the season? Nobody's going to want to unless there's gambling.
Yeah, I mean, there's also like you're a fan of the sport and all that, but agree.
That's what the league would say, but yeah, absolutely.
We've liked gambling for a variety of reasons, and we've even explained how you could use gambling and tie it to the draft lottery and improve things. So we are wholeheartedly behind this, and yeah, it's. I don't want to see coaches like Greg Popovich who are like, I don't like it. I liked it the way it used to be. I'm like, the way it used to be, it wasn't worth $1 billion a franchise. If you want it back when it was 8 freaking teams and nobody was watching, right? I think the Wilt Chamberlain game, I think it definitely had below 9,000, might have even had below 5,000 because it was played in Hershey, Pennsylvania. It wasn't even played in like a legit
radio only, not televised.
Yeah, that's been one thing that's bugged me. There's a book that claims he shot underhanded free throws that year. and I can't find proof of how often he did that or what games. And I tried to look up his 100-point game specifically, and yeah, I could find audio of it, and I don't know if he shot underhanded free throws in that game because they don't mention it on the announcement. So yeah, like if you want to go back to that era, then you give up the money and the good. Yeah,
that's what I was going to say. I bet Greg Popovich likes his multi-million-dollar contract a lot more than what he was making back in the 70s.
Exactly. All right, you have a really, really good shout out that I think is an awesome one to end us on.
Oh, yeah. Along those same lines, we were talking about Sue Bird earlier. We have a Woj bomb from today. Indiana Pacers are hiring longtime WNBA executive Kelly Krauskopf as the first female assistant general manager in NBA history. League sources tell ESPN, so shout out to Kelly.
And we will give Indiana, I think Indiana and Dallas. It's funny, and they're both doing really well this year. They get placed on doing really good moves. We thought the Paul George trade was a really good one, and Sabonis is looking great. Kelly's a fantastic signing from the looks of it. The same thing with Jenny Busek for the Mavericks. So this is some teams that are doing well this year that we have agreed with their decisions, are also hiring female executives. So we love it.
Those are all my shout outs, Trey.
All right. Well, I think we are good. That's been our show, Brian. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live every week, Monday nights, sometime between 7:30 and 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers. You can catch the live recaps if you want on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. We also have a iTunes and Stitcher podcast form. The Boxscore Geeks Show. Subscribe, upload. It helps us out. I've been your host, Trey Alvarez. You can find me most places as Nerd Numbers. Co-host Brian Foster. You can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. And with us in spirit, as always, Patrick Minton. You can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. That's been our show. Hope you have a good one. And actually, I'm going to give a PS shout out that I forgot, Brian. If you are not subscribed to the Agony of Defeat podcast, you really need to. I mean,
they've had some great episodes lately. I've been listening to them all.
Horrible marketing on my part, Brian. But like if you had 10 podcasts to listen to and we're in that 10th slot, slide us out for the Agony of Defeat podcast. They are amazing. Just yell at them. They are on Twitter, Jonathan Weiler and Matt Andrews, and Agony of Defeat. I believe they also have that as well. Yell at them to do more. I think they're doing once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks. They need to be a weekly podcast. They are amazing. All right. That's our show. We'll talk to you next week.